The flower dust suspended in the golden afternoon light looked like stardust, dancing in the silent air of El Escaldus. Nia wiped her hands on her apron, the rough linen fabric grounding her against the overwhelming scent of caramelized sugar and roasted hazelnuts that permeated the small kitchen. Outside, the Mediterranean Sea was a sheet of hammered turquoise, lapping lazily against the rocky coast of St. Jean-Cap-Ferrat. It was a place for the wealthy to disappear, for the tired to rest, and for people like Nia to pretend that the past was a continent away. She had come here 6 months ago, running not from the law, but from the suffocating grief of Atlanta, leaving behind a corporate career that felt meaningless after the funeral. Here she was just the American woman who baked the best pastries in the village, the tall, striking black woman who smiled with her lips but rarely with her eyes. Her solitude had been absolute, a fortress she built around herself, until the villa next door, the sprawling, modern structure of glass and white stone that had stood empty for years, suddenly woke up. It started with a black sedan with tinted windows arriving in the dead of night. Then came the security cameras, discreetly installed in the olive trees, and finally him. Nia first saw him 3 weeks ago while she was sweeping the limestone patio of her shop before opening. He was standing on the terrace of the adjacent villa, looking out at the sea with a stillness that was almost unnatural. He was Korean, dressed in a loose white linen shirt that did nothing to hide the width of his shoulders or the tapering strength of his torso. Even from a distance, the air around him felt heavy, charged with a static that made the hair on Nia's arms stand up. He had turned then, catching her staring. His face was a mask of cold, handsome indifference, sharp-jawed and dark-eyed, but he had offered a singular, curt nod before disappearing behind the sliding glass doors. He became a ghost that haunted the periphery of her vision, until the day he finally crossed the threshold of her patisserie. The bell above the door chimed, cutting through the morning jazz playing softly on the radio. Nia looked up from a tray of fresh croissants to see him filling the frame of the doorway. Up close, he was even more imposing. There was a dangerous elegance to him, a precision in the way he moved, like a predator trying to pass as a pedestrian. He walked to the display case, his eyes scanning the rows of tarts and cakes with the same intensity one might use to assess a threat. "The vanilla eclairs," he said. His voice was deep, his English perfect but clipped, carrying a faint, unrecognizable accent that wasn't quite American and not quite British. "2, please." Nia reached for the tongs, her heart beating a strange, erratic rhythm against her ribs. "You're the neighbor," she said, keeping her tone light, professional, "the one who hates sunlight." He looked up, his dark eyes locking onto hers. For a second she saw something flash behind the void, surprise, perhaps, or amusement. "I prefer the quiet," he replied, "and the shade." "You came to the wrong place if you hate the sun. This is the south of France. The sun is practically a religion here." She placed the eclairs in a white box, tying it with a satin ribbon. Her fingers brushed his as she handed it over. His skin was cool, rougher than she expected for a man who dressed in silk and linen. She noticed a faint, jagged scar running from his wrist up into his sleeve, quickly hidden as he pulled his hand back. "I am Min Ho," he said, placing a 20-euro note on the counter. He didn't wait for change. "Nia," she countered, watching him turn to leave. "And Min Ho, we close at 4, in case you need more shade." He paused at the door, glancing back over his shoulder. A corner of his mouth ticked upward, a microscopic crack in the armor. "I will keep that in mind, Nia." That was how it began, a transaction that turned into a ritual. Every morning at 8:00 a.m., Minho would walk down the stone path connecting their properties. He would buy 2 vanilla eclairs and a black coffee. He would sit at the small iron table in the corner of the patio, hidden by the bougainvillea, and eat in silence while reading newspapers on a tablet, news from Seoul, Tokyo, New York. He never spoke much, but his presence became a heavy, anchoring weight in Nia's day. There was a strange comfort in their shared silence. Nia sensed he was hiding, just as she was. She saw the way he sat with his back to the wall, never the door. She saw the way his eyes tracked every passing car, every stranger who walked too close to the shop. He was a man resting, but he was not a man at peace. And she knew what that felt like. She knew the exhaustion of constantly looking over your shoulder, looking for answers that the universe refused to give. One rainy Tuesday, when the shop was empty, the air heavy with the scent of ozone and yeast, the dynamic shifted. "You look tired," Minho said. He hadn't touched his coffee. He was watching her knead dough, his gaze uncomfortably direct. Nia paused, dusting flour from her wrists. "Bad anniversary," she admitted, surprised she was saying it aloud. She usually hoarded her pain like gold. "My brother, it's been a year today." Minho's stillness deepened. "An accident." Nia laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "That's what the Atlanta PD said. A car accident. Single vehicle, slick road, no witnesses. Case closed in 48 hours. She slammed the dough down onto the marble counter. He was a semi-pro racer. He could drive through a hurricane with his eyes closed. He didn't just slide off a straight road. Minho watched her, his eyes narrowing slightly, calculating. You think he was killed? I know he was, Nia said, her voice dropping to a whisper. He was in trouble, he owed money, or he saw something. I don't know, but nobody listened. A young black man in a fast car. Easy statistic, no investigation needed. She looked at Minho, her eyes burning. So I came here to breathe, before I suffocated from the anger. Minho remained silent for a long time. He picked up his cup, rotating it in his scarred hands. Sometimes, he said softly, his voice dropping to a register that vibrated in Nia's chest, the truth is a dangerous thing to chase. It has teeth, it bites back. I'm not afraid of teeth, Nia replied. You should be, he said, standing up. He looked at her then, and for the first time the mask dropped completely. She saw a profound, ancient darkness in him, a violence that had been tightly leashed. Trust me, Nia, let the dead rest. It is safer for the living. He left before she could respond, leaving the scent of expensive cologne and rain behind him. The tension between them changed after that. It wasn't just neighborly intrigue anymore, it was a recognition of shared scars. He began to stay longer. He fixed the hinge on her back door without being asked. She started baking a special tart with matcha and white chocolate, leaving it on his side of the low stone wall that separated their gardens. They were dancing around each other, two wounded animals circling in the dark, drawn together by gravity but terrified of the impact. But the bubble of the quiet resort town was fragile. Nia didn't know that Minho wasn't just a wealthy heir on sabbatical. She didn't know his real name was Junwoo, the exiled enforcer of the violently fractured Chenil Syndicate, a man with a bounty on his head in 3 countries. She didn't know that his vacation was a strategic retreat to let the heat die down after a coup that had left the streets of Incheon red. Until the night the storm broke. It was 3 weeks later. The mistral wind was howling, whipping the sea into a frenzy. Nia couldn't sleep. The rattling of the shutters and the anniversary of her brother's death had left her wired and anxious. Around 2:00 a.m., she gave up on sleep and went downstairs to the kitchen to prep the starter for the sourdough. The kitchen window faced the rear of her property, overlooking the private wooden pier that she shared with the villa next door. The storm had passed, leaving a bright, full moon that cut through the clouds, illuminating the wet stones and the black water. Movement caught her eye. Nia froze, instinctively ducking below the window frame, peering over the edge. Down on the pier, the waves were crashing violently against the pilings, but it wasn't the waves that held her attention. It was Minho. He was dressed in black, rain-soaked clothes that clung to his frame. He wasn't alone. There was a mass on the wooden planks, a lump that looked terrifyingly human. Nia's breath hitched in her throat. She watched, paralyzed, as Minho knelt. He wasn't panicking. He moved with a terrifying, methodical efficiency. He rolled the heavy shape, definitely a body. A man in a suit to the edge of the pier. With a heave of exertion that showed the terrifying power in his back and arms, he tipped the body over the edge. Splash! The sea swallowed the secret instantly. Nia clapped a hand over her mouth, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. But it wasn't over. Minho didn't run. He turned on a hose attached to the dock post. He began to scrub. He washed the planks, the water running red before diluting into the ocean. He scrubbed his hands, his arms, his face. He was erasing a life. Terror, cold and sharp, flooded Nia's veins. This was the man who ate her eclairs, the man who fixed her door. He was a killer. She should run. She should call the police. She should grab her passport and flee back to the chaos of Atlanta. But as she watched him turn off the water and stand there, looking out at the dark horizon, the terror began to mutate. It shifted, cooled, and hardened into something else entirely. She thought of her brother. She thought of the accident. She thought of the local police in Atlanta who didn't care to look at the tire marks, who didn't care to check the phone records. She thought of the helplessness that had eaten her alive for a year. And then she looked at Minho, a man capable of making problems disappear, a man who clearly operated outside the law, outside of morality, a monster perhaps, but a monster who was now vulnerable. He thought he was unseen. He thought the night and the storm covered his sins, but Nia had seen everything. She didn't call the police. She didn't turn on the lights. She stood in the dark kitchen, her hands gripping the cold marble counter until her knuckles turned white. The shock was fading, replaced by a clarity as sharp as a diamond. He was a killer, and because she knew it, she owned him. Nia watched him walk back toward his villa, disappearing into the shadows. She let out a slow, shaky breath. She wouldn't run. She was done running. Tomorrow she would bake eclairs. She would open the shop. And when he came in for his morning coffee, she would name her price. Her brother's death was a locked door, and Minho was the battering ram she was going to use to break it down. The morning sun hit the pavement with deceptive innocence. bleaching the white stones of the promenade and making the sea sparkle as if it hadn't swallowed a man-whole just 6 hours prior. Inside the patisserie, the air was thick with the smell of roasting coffee beans and almond flour, but for Nia, the scent was choked by the phantom metallic tang of blood she couldn't scrub from her memory. She moved through her morning routine like a clockwork doll. Bake, glaze, display, wipe. Her hands were steady, but her mind was a whirlwind of cold, sharp edges. She had spent the remaining hours of the night sitting on her kitchen floor, staring at a folder she had brought from Atlanta. The folder contained everything she had on Marcus: police reports, autopsy photos, phone records she had illegally obtained. It was a chaotic mess of grief and dead ends. She needed a key to unlock it. And now she had found a locksmith. At 7:55 a.m., the familiar crunch of gravel announced his arrival. Nia didn't look up as the door chimed. She felt the shift in air pressure, the heavy, silent gravity that Minho carried with him. He walked to the counter, his gait relaxed, his face the picture of a man whose only worry was whether the weather would hold for a sail. He wore a crisp navy polo and beige trousers, looking every bit the wealthy expatriate. 2 vanilla eclairs, he said, his voice as smooth as the ganache she had just piped. And the coffee, black. Nia placed the box on the glass counter. She didn't let go of it. Minho reached for the box, but she held firm. His eyes, dark and endless, flicked up to meet hers. For the first time, she didn't look away or offer a polite customer service smile. She stared right into the void. "The stain on the third piling of the pier," Nia said, her voice low and steady. "You missed a spot, about chest height." The silence that followed was absolute. The jazz music on the radio seemed to fade into a dull hum. Minho didn't flinch. His pulse didn't jump in his neck. The only sign that he had heard her was the sudden, absolute stillness of his body. He looked like a statue carved from obsidian. "Excuse me," he asked, his tone polite, bordering on bored. "And the hose," Nia continued, leaning closer, her eyes searching his for a crack. "You called it to the left. My gardener calls it to the right. If the police look at the pier, they'll see the wood is wet when it hasn't rained since 3:00 a.m. They'll see the bleach burns on the algae." Minho slowly withdrew his hand from the box. He took a step back, his eyes scanning the windows, then the door. He was assessing exits. He was assessing her. The predator was awake. "You are observant," he said softly. The accent was thicker now, dangerous. "That is not always a survival trait, Nia. I saw the body, Minho, or whoever he was. I saw you roll him into the water. I saw you wash the blood off the deck." Nia walked around the counter. It was a reckless move, removing the barrier between them, but she needed him to know she wasn't cowering. She walked to the front door and flipped the sign to Ferme, turning the lock with a loud click. She turned back to face him. He hadn't moved, but his posture had shifted. His weight was on the balls of his feet. He could snap her neck before she even screamed, and they both knew it. "Are you blackmailing me for money?" Minho asked, his voice devoid of emotion. "Because I can pay you, or I can remove the problem. You are making a very dangerous calculation." "I don't want your money," Nia spat, the anger flaring up hot and bright. "And I'm not afraid of you. I've been dead inside for a year. You can't kill what's already gone." She reached under the counter and pulled out the thick, worn manila envelope. She slammed it down on top of the pastry case. "This," she said, pointing a trembling finger at the file, "this is the price." Minho frowned, his gaze dropping to the folder. "What is this?" "My brother Marcus," Nia's voice cracked, but she forced it steady. "The police said he lost control of his car. I know he was run off the road. He was mixed up with people, bad people. Maybe not as bad as you, but bad enough. I've spent 12 months hitting brick walls. I don't know how to track burner phones. I don't know how to intimidate witnesses. I don't know how to make people talk when they want to stay silent." She looked him dead in the eye. "But you do." Minho stared at her, a flicker of genuine surprise crossing his features. He looked from her face to the file, and then let out a short, incredulous breath that might have been a laugh. "You want me to be your private investigator?" "I want you to be what you are," Nia corrected. "A monster. I want you to use that darkness for me. You find out who killed Marcus and you bring me their names. You do that and I forget what I saw last night. I forget the blood. I forget the body." Minho stepped closer, towering over her. The scent of him, clean soap and expensive tobacco, filled her senses. He leaned down, his face inches from hers. "You have no idea what you are asking. You are asking to invite the devil into your house, Nia. Once you open that door, you cannot close it." "The door is already open," she whispered. Before he could answer, a flash of blue light swept across the interior of the shop. A siren wailed, cutting off abruptly right outside. Nia flinched, her eyes widening. Minho moved instantly. He didn't run, he shifted. He grabbed the pastry box and the coffee cup, leaned against the counter, and adopted a posture of casual ease. "Unlock the door," he commanded, his voice barely a whisper, yet hitting her like a whip. "Now." Nia fumbled with the latch, her fingers shaking. She turned the lock just as the door handle depressed. Lieutenant Dubois walked in. He was a heavyset man with a kind face that hid a sharp, cynical mind. He looked tired. Behind him, through the window, Nia could see 2 patrol cars and a small crowd gathering near the beach access point, right near her pier. "Mademoiselle Nia," Dubois said, tipping his cap. He looked at Min-ho, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Monsieur, Kim is it?" "Lee," Min-ho corrected smoothly, using a fake name. "Is something wrong, Lieutenant? You are disturbing my breakfast." He took a bite of the eclair, the picture of nonchalance. Dubois sighed, taking off his hat. "My apologies, we have a situation. A body has washed up on the rocks just below your properties. A fisherman found him 20 minutes ago." Nia felt the blood drain from her face. She gripped the counter for support. Min-ho glanced at her, his eyes warning her to breathe. "A drowning?" Min-ho asked, chewing slowly. "Unlikely," Dubois said. Watching them both closely, "He has a bullet hole in his chest, and he is, well dressed, not a local." The lieutenant turned his gaze to Nia. "Nia, you are here early every day. Did you hear anything last night? See anything?" The storm was loud, but a gunshot. Nia's throat felt like it was stuffed with cotton. She looked at Dubois, then at Min-ho. Min-ho was watching her, his face impassive, but his hand on the counter was clenched tight enough to turn the knuckles white. He was waiting for her to betray him. It would be so easy, just one word. She thought of the file on the counter. She thought of Marcus, lying in a casket that was closed because the crash had left him unrecognizable. Nia looked back at Dubois and summoned a mask of confusion. I heard the thunder. The wind was howling against the shutters all night, Lieutenant. I didn't sleep well, but I didn't hear any shots. I was in the kitchen around 2:00 a.m. making the starter." "And you saw nothing?" Dubois pressed. "Your window overlooks the pier." "I saw the rain," Nia lied, her voice gaining strength. "It was pitch black. I couldn't see past the terrace." She gestured to Min-ho. "Mr. Lee came in a few minutes ago. We were just talking about the storm damage to the gardens." Dubois held her gaze for a long, uncomfortable second. Then he exhaled and nodded. "Very well. We may need to tape off the access to your pier for a few hours, Nia, for forensics." "Of course," she said. "Monsieur Lee," Dubois added, turning to Min-ho, "we will need to check your perimeter cameras, if you have them." Min-ho smiled, a charming, vacuous smile. "I am afraid I value my privacy, Lieutenant. The cameras are dummies, installed by the previous owner to scare off burglars. They don't record." Dubois grunted, clearly annoyed but not suspicious enough to push it yet. "A pity. Good day to you both." The bell chimed as the policeman left. The blue lights continued to flash, casting rhythmic shadows across the shop. Min-ho didn't move until the police car door slammed shut outside. He set the half-eaten eclair down. The charm evaporated, replaced by the cold intensity from before. "You lie well," he observed. "I had practice," Nia said, her hands finally shaking visibly now that the danger had passed. "I lied to my mother for months that I was okay. Lying to a cop is easier." Min-ho looked at the file on the counter again. He reached out and placed his hand over it. His fingers were long, elegant, and deadly. "The man on the rocks," Min-ho said quietly. "He was a cleaner sent by my uncle. He was supposed to kill me in my sleep. I sent him back to the sea. There will be others." He slid the file toward himself. "If I do this," he said, locking eyes with her, "if I look into your brother's death, you are involved. If my enemies find me, they will find you. If your brother's killers find out you are digging again, they will come for you. There is no safe anymore, Nia. Are you sure this is what you want?" Nia looked at the file under his hand. It was the only hope she had left. "I have nothing to lose," she said. Min-ho picked up the file. He tucked it under his arm. "Everyone thinks they have nothing to lose," he murmured, walking to the door. He paused with his hand on the latch, "until they find something worth living for." He opened the door, the bell chiming brightly. "I will look at the file, tonight. Come to the villa at midnight. Bring the pastries." He stepped out into the blinding sunlight, leaving Nia alone in the shop, the taste of adrenaline bitter in her mouth. She had made a deal with the devil, and now she had to bake for him. The walk from the back door of the patisserie to the side entrance of the Villa El Ombre took less than 2 minutes, but to Nia, it felt like crossing a border between 2 warring nations. The night air was thick with the scent of jasmine and the salt spray from the earlier storm. In her hands, she carried a small box of financiers, almond cakes, dense and rich. It felt ridiculous, a domestic offering brought to a war room, but Minho had asked for them. It was a test of obedience, or perhaps just a power play. She found the side door unlocked. Inside, the villa was nothing like the warm, chaotic comfort of her bakery. It was a temple of minimalism, concrete floors, floor-to-ceiling glass looking out into the black void of the sea, and furniture that looked more like sculpture than seating. It was cold, kept at a temperature that made Nia pull her cardigan tighter around herself. In here, Minho's voice echoed from the main living area. Nia followed the sound. Minho was sitting at a glass dining table that was currently covered in laptops, tablets, and loose papers from her brother's file. The warm yellow light of a single desk lamp cut through the blue gloom of the room. He had changed out of his neighbor disguise. The beige trousers were gone, replaced by tactical black pants and a fitted black shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing the intricate ink of tattoos that wound around his forearms, dragons and waves in dark, bruised ink. A gun, sleek and matte black, sat on the table next to a coffee mug like a casual centerpiece. He didn't look up as she approached. His fingers flew across a keyboard, his eyes darting between 3 different screens. "Close the door," he said. "Sit." Nia set the box of pastries down next to the gun. The contrast was jarring. "You found something." "I found everything your police refused to look for," Minho said, finally stopping. He swiveled his chair to face her, taking off a pair of thin, wire-rimmed glasses she hadn't seen before. He looked tired, the shadows under his eyes pronounced, but his gaze was electric. "Your brother was not just a semi-pro racer, Nia. He was a ghost runner." Nia frowned, sinking into the chair opposite him. "A what?" "A courier for high-value, time-sensitive transport. Drugs, diamonds, information. Usually for cartels who need a driver who does not ask questions and can outrun a helicopter." Minho tapped a key, and a map of Atlanta popped up on the main screen, overlaid with red lines. "These are his GPS logs from the month he died. See these loops? These are drop points. Industrial zones, private airstrips." Nia felt the floor drop out from under her. No, Marcus was a mechanic. He loved cars. He wouldn't. "He needed money," Minho interrupted, his voice not unkind, but brutally factual. "I checked his bank records. The real ones, not the ones the IRS sees. He was in debt to a loan shark in Decatur, $50,000. He took a job to clear the debt, one job." "And it went wrong," Nia whispered, the pieces finally clicking together. The late nights, the nervousness, the new watch he couldn't afford. "It went wrong because of who he was driving for," Minho said. He leaned forward, pushing a printed photo across the glass. It was a grainy surveillance shot of a man in a grey suit getting into Marcus's car. "This man is an accountant for the Triad. He was stealing from his bosses. Your brother was hired to drive him to safety. The people chasing them, they don't leave witnesses. They ran him off the road to get to the accountant. The crash didn't kill Marcus immediately. The autopsy photos show bruising on his neck. He was strangled to ensure silence." Nia stared at the photo, her vision blurring. The anger that had sustained her for a year suddenly evaporated, leaving behind a hollow, aching grief. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. He was just a kid. He was just stupid and scared. She expected Minho to tell her to stop crying, to be cold. Instead, she heard the scrape of a chair. A moment later, a hand settled on her shoulder. It was heavy, warm, and solid. "It is the nature of this world," Minho murmured, standing beside her. "The small fish get eaten by the sharks not because they are bad, but because they are in the water." Nia looked up at him. He was terrifyingly close. For the first time, she didn't see the killer or the neighbor. She saw a man who understood the weight of ghosts. "Who did it?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Who ordered it?" "A local syndicate in Atlanta. Small time compared to what I deal with, but connected." Minho's thumb brushed away a tear tracking down her cheek. The gesture was shockingly intimate. His skin was rough, calloused from violence, yet his touch was feather-light. "I can give you their names, Nia. I can send the information to your FBI. They will go to prison." "Is that enough?" Nia asked, searching his dark eyes. "Is prison enough?" Minho's expression darkened. The atmosphere in the room shifted, charged with a sudden magnetic tension. He leaned down, placing a hand on the table on either side of her chair, boxing her in. "Justice is a fairy tale told to children," he whispered. "Revenge is the only reality, if you want them dead. Say the word, I can make a phone call. In 24 hours, the men who killed your brother will cease to exist." Nia's breath hitched. She looked at his mouth, then his eyes. He was offering her a weapon. He was offering to kill for her. It was horrific. It was seductive. "Why?" she breathed. "Why would you do that for me?" Minho paused. His gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. The silence stretched, heavy and hot. Because you are the first person in 5 years who looked at me and didn't see a monster or a paycheck. You saw a neighbor. He leaned closer. Nia didn't pull away. She could smell the soap on his skin, feel the heat radiating from his chest. The danger he represented was no longer a threat to her, it was a shield. She reached up, her hand hesitating before touching the scar on his wrist. "I see you, Min-ho," she whispered. He closed his eyes for a second, leaning his forehead against hers. It was a surrender. For a man who lived by control, this was a moment of chaos. "Nia," he groaned low in his throat. He tilted his head, his lips brushing hers, a tentative, testing pressure that promised an avalanche. Click. The sound was soft, mechanical, and came from the hallway. Min-ho froze. The romance vanished instantly. He was gone from her space in a blur of motion. He grabbed the gun from the table and killed the desk lamp, plunging the room into darkness. "Get down," he hissed, grabbing Nia's arm and pulling her off the chair. He shoved her into the space beneath the heavy glass table. "Stay there, do not make a sound." "What is it?" Nia whispered, panic spiking in her chest. "The perimeter sensors didn't trip," Min-ho said, his voice a flat line of concentration. He moved toward the hallway, moving silently in his socks, the gun raised, which means they are professionals. Nia huddled under the table, her heart hammering against the cold floor. She watched Min-ho's silhouette merge with the shadows. A second later, the front window, the massive, bulletproof pane overlooking the sea, shattered with a deafening crash. Glass sprayed across the room like shrapnel. A canister clattered onto the concrete floor, hissing. "Gas," Min-ho shouted. He was suddenly back, grabbing Nia by the back of her shirt and hauling her up. "Move, kitchen, now." White smoke began to fill the room, stinging Nia's eyes. She coughed, stumbling as Min-ho half dragged her toward the back of the villa. "Who are they?" she choked out. "The police." "No," Min-ho said, kicking open the kitchen door and shoving her through. He turned back, firing 2 shots blindly into the smoke. A scream echoed from the living room. He slammed the heavy oak door and locked it, then dragged a massive stainless steel refrigerator in front of it with a grunt of exertion. "Not police," Min-ho said, turning to her. His eyes were wild, alive with the adrenaline of the fight. He checked the magazine of his gun. "My uncle found me, and now he has found you too." He looked at her and for a second, the mask of the cold killer slipped. He looked terrified, not for himself, but for her. "I told you, Nia," he said, grabbing a knife from the magnetic rack and handing it to her. "The door is open, and the devil is inside." Heavy thuds slammed against the kitchen door. The wood splintered. "We go out the window," Min-ho commanded. "Run to the pier, do not stop, do not look back." "I'm not leaving you," Nia said, gripping the knife handle so hard her hand hurt. Min-ho looked at her, a fierce pride burning in his eyes. "Then we fight." The wood of the kitchen door exploded inward, sending splinters flying like shrapnel. A heavy boot kicked through the gap, followed by the barrel of a suppressed assault rifle. Min-ho didn't hesitate. He grabbed a bottle of high-proof Grand Marnier from the counter, stuffed a linen napkin into the neck, and lit it with the burner of the gas stove. With a calm, underhand toss, he threw the bottle at the splintered door. The glass shattered against the mercenaries trying to breach the room. Blue and orange flames erupted, engulfing the doorway in a wall of fire. Screams of surprise and pain echoed from the hallway, buying them precious seconds. "Go," Min-ho roared, grabbing a heavy cast-iron skillet and smashing the glass of the kitchen window. He cleared the jagged shards with his elbow and vaulted out into the cool night air. Nia followed, landing awkwardly in the wet grass of the garden, the knife still clutched in her hand. The peaceful resort town of St. Jean-Cap-Ferrat had turned into a war zone, though the silence of the suppressors kept the chaos contained to the property. The moon was hidden behind clouds now, plunging the garden into shadows. "The pier," Min-ho whispered, gripping Nia's hand. "My boat is fueled. It's the only way out. The roads will be blocked." They ran crouched low, weaving through the olive trees and rosemary bushes. Behind them, smoke began to billow from the villa, the fire alarm finally wailing into the night. A spotlight from a helicopter cut through the sky above. Police or mercenaries, it didn't matter. Both were enemies now. As they reached the stone steps leading down to the water, a figure stepped out from the shadows of the boathouse. It was a man, massive and bald, holding a pistol with a casual, terrifying ease. He wasn't wearing a mask. "Jun-woo," the man said in Korean, his voice grating like gravel. "Your uncle sends his regards." Min-ho shoved Nia behind him. "Get to the boat," he said in English, his voice low and lethal. "Min-ho, no. Go." Min-ho launched himself at the man. It was a blur of violence that Nia's eyes could barely track. The gun went off, thwip, thwip, 2 shots hitting the dirt as Minho deflected the aim. They crashed onto the wooden decking of the pier, a tangle of limbs and brutal strikes. Minho was fast, deadly, but the other man was a giant, absorbing blows that would have felled a normal person. Nia scrambled toward the sleek white speedboat tied at the end of the dock. She fumbled with the ropes, her fingers slippery with sweat and fear. She glanced back. Minho had been thrown against a pylon. The giant was advancing, pulling a knife that looked more like a machete. Minho was struggling to rise, clutching his side where blood was already staining his black shirt. He was hurt. He wasn't going to win this. Nia looked at the boat. The keys were in the ignition. She could leave. She could start the engine and disappear into the Mediterranean, leaving the monster to fight his own war. But then she remembered the file. She remembered the way he had looked at her in the villa, not as a pawn, but as a partner. She remembered the touch of his hand on her cheek. "I'm not afraid of teeth," she had told him. Nia scanned the boat's dashboard. In the emergency kit mounted on the wall, she saw a red plastic handle, a flare gun. She grabbed it, snapped the barrel open to check the load, and snapped it shut. She didn't run to the boat. She ran back up the dock. The giant had Minho pinned, the knife raised for a killing blow. "Hey!" Nia screamed. The giant turned his head, surprised to see the baker standing there, legs planted wide, shaking but determined. Nia didn't hesitate. She raised the flare gun and pulled the trigger. With a deafening whoosh, a ball of blinding magnesium fire shot across the 10 feet separating them. It struck the giant square in the chest. He roared, staggering back, batting at the searing flame that was melting his tactical vest. Minho didn't waste the opening. He swept the man's legs out from under him, and as the giant fell screaming into the dark water, Minho scrambled up. He grabbed Nia's hand, his grip like iron. "Run!" They sprinted to the boat. Minho untied the last rope while Nia jumped behind the wheel and turned the key. The twin engines roared to life, a deep, guttural growl that shook the planks. Minho leaped aboard just as bullets began to chew up the wood where they had been standing. Maori men were pouring down the stairs from the garden. "Punch it!" Minho yelled, collapsing onto the leather bench seat. Nia slammed the throttle forward. The boat surged, the bow lifting high as it carved a white path through the black water. They sped away from the coast, the burning villa becoming a small, orange star in the distance, the sirens of the approaching police fading into the wind. They drove in silence for 20 minutes, heading straight out into the open sea until the lights of France were just a glittering necklace on the horizon. Nia finally pulled the throttle back, letting the boat idle in the crushing silence of the ocean. She left the wheel and knelt beside Minho. He was pressing a towel against his side. The bleeding had slowed, but his face was pale, sweat beading on his forehead. "You shot him with a flare gun," Minho wheezed, a look of incredulous wonder on his face. He let out a short, pained laugh. "I have never seen anything so beautiful." "I told you," Nia said, her voice trembling as the adrenaline crashed, tears finally spilling over. "I have a lot of rage." Minho reached out, taking her hand, his bloody fingers interlaced with hers. "We can't go back, Nia. Not to the shop, not to the eclairs. You are dead to that life now. You are a ghost like me." "I know," she whispered. She looked back toward the shore, toward the life she had built to hide from her grief. It was gone, but strangely, the heavy weight in her chest, the suffocation she had felt for a year, was gone too. What about Marcus? Minho looked her in the eyes, his gaze steady and serious. "I made the call while you were packing the pastries. My contact in Atlanta. He is efficient. The men who ordered your brother's death. They will be found with their own supply in their veins by morning. The police will call it an overdose. Justice is done." Nia closed her eyes, letting the words wash over her. It wasn't the legal justice she had thought she wanted. It was colder, darker, but it felt finished. The ghost of her brother could finally rest. "So," Nia said, opening her eyes and looking at the man who had destroyed her life and saved it all in one night, "where do we go?" Minho struggled to sit up, wincing, but he didn't let go of her hand. He looked out at the vast, open darkness of the sea, then back at her. The predator was gone. The neighbor was gone. Only the man remained. "I have a safe house in Casablanca," he said softly. "The sun is hot there, the coffee is strong." He paused, his thumb stroking her knuckles. "And I believe they have excellent markets for baking supplies." Nia smiled. It was a small, tired smile, but it reached her eyes for the first time in a year. "I'll need a new oven," she said. "I will buy you 10, Minho promised. He leaned forward, and this time there was no breaking glass to interrupt them. He kissed her, a kiss that tasted of sea salt, smoke, and iron, a kiss that sealed a pact between two survivors who had found their match in the wreckage. Nia pulled back, brushed the hair from his forehead, and stood up. She walked back to the helm and engaged the engines. She didn't look back at France. She turned the boat south, toward the open water, toward the unknown, driving them both into the dark together.